My name is Ric McDonald. I was the CEO and Executive Director for Kin Canada nationally at the time that the Portraits of Honor project was undertaken, and that made me responsible for the overall launch and direction of the project. Well, Dave had been a longtime Kin member and was a member of one of the local clubs, so I had known Dave for some time. We had met on many occasions and had done functions at his club level and so on. So we knew each other well. I clearly remember the day that, as I say, Dave knew me well, so felt quite comfortable popping in and visited my office one day and wanted to talk about an idea that had come to him over the weekend after seeing newspaper coverage and news coverage of casualty counts in Afghanistan for Canadian forces. And it had disturbed him enough that he had come up with an idea to create a mural, basically consisting of lifelike or slightly larger faces of all of the fallen as a commemorative action. He felt that that was something he really needed to do. He'd had involvement with veterans for some time, so it was a cause that was near and dear to his heart. And so he sat down, we had a cup of coffee, and he commenced to tell me about his concept for this. It was pretty clear right off the bat. He was quite somber about it. It wasn't a sales pitch. It was genuine, and he was moved, and what he had to say was moving. So it caught my attention pretty quickly, and so we had a lengthy conversation about it. Once he set out the fact that he would like to do this in order to commemorate the fallen and build Canadian public profile and awareness, he then said, I'd also really like to see this be some kind of project that could be done in partnership with Kin Canada. And that was his level of dedication to the organization. And so we began to kick that around. And it just happened that at the time, I think it was just slightly before that, Rick Hansen had undertaken the Wheels of Motion national tour as an anniversary commemoration of his original Man in Motion tour. And so that was a little bit top of mind. And as we sat and talked, it was pretty clear that this concept had all kinds of potential for spinning off. That yes, it could accomplish the objectives that Dave mentioned in terms of commemorating the fallen and raising public awareness. But it also seemed that it could potentially bring a level of comfort to the affected families and loved ones. And there might even be another way to benefit the families that had been left behind, especially the widows and widowers. So combining that with the fact that I had just been listening to coverage on the Hansen tour, it seemed kind of obvious. It just sort of, there it was. Why couldn't we launch that kind of tour to raise awareness in the same way that Rick Hansen had done for spinal cord injuries? And that was the genesis of it. And we knew that there was a big hill to climb. Dave needed space in which to create his masterpiece, because this thing was, 10 feet tall and 50 feet long that it was expected to be. We obviously were going to need a lot of funding. We needed organization. We needed a lot of planning. We needed a lot of hands on deck. And lastly, I felt that it needed a charitable component as well, as I said, to benefit the families of the fallen. And that meant we needed a charitable arm, since Kin Canada itself is not a registered charity. But Kin Canada does have a registered charity arm the Kin Canada Foundation. So it was, okay, so how do we involve them and how do we engage them in that aspect of it? So in a pretty short period of time, there was a lot of ground to cover and a lot of people to tap on the shoulder, and away we went. In its history, Kin Canada had done some very large projects. When service groups, community service groups like Kin Canada, were at their peak, in their heyday, back in the 70s, I suppose, late 60s, Kin Canada had undertaken some very large projects, the most noteworthy of which was actually during the Second World War. The Milk for Britain project, on which we've done a lot of coverage, or the organization has done a lot of coverage. That was actually an international project to raise milk, dried powder milk, to ship over to Britain at the time when the bombings were virtually starving a lot of Britons, and a lot of kids were deprived of just basic nutrition like milk. So it had been some time since a project of that scope had been undertaken, no question. But at the same time, it's an organization of community-based people who are doers, who are accustomed to regularly organizing projects that are anywhere from, fundraisers for a few $100 to millions of dollars. So there's a ton of expertise within the organization that could be called upon in order to execute something like this. We didn't have all the pieces in place because it wasn't something that we routinely did. But we knew that if people would answer the bell, that the resources were there. And another one of those fortuitous things that we just happened to have, not long beforehand, cleared out the basement of the national headquarters building in Cambridge, Ontario. And that freed up, from some other storage and inventory activities and so on, to decide what we were going to do with it next. And that freed up about 5,000 square feet of space. And so when Dave was looking for a space, we reached an agreement for him to be in that space, rent-free for the duration that it took him to do this and to manage this project. And that took that concern and burden off of him and gave him a secure place close to home that he could come in and work at his leisure and not be disturbed. And it worked extremely well. There had been, as there had been with Dave, there had been a pre-existing affinity for veterans and Canadian Armed Forces within the organization. And it hadn't escaped anybody's attention that the casualty count was mounting significantly in Afghanistan. So it wasn't by any means a tough sell, and it culminated in, I believe it was 2010, and we had a presentation and at our national convention, AGM, sorry. And it highlighted the concept for the project and the intent and the objectives and so on to the national convention floor, and it immediately got a tremendous amount of uptake, which then carried back to people's clubs when they returned home. So, in fact, it wasn't a situation where it was difficult to find support for it. It was kind of the contrary, where it was almost difficult to keep the lid on it. Because when you get 7,500 or so doers who are used to project planning and execution, we had committees and things popping up all over the country for people chomping at the bit to get going on this thing. So keeping it all under control and all pointed in one direction was probably more the challenge than trying to find the support. As the person who was kind of sitting behind the desk and turning everybody loose on this thing, unfortunately, for the most part, I didn't accompany it on the road the way a Sean Libben did, or in many cases a Bruce Lloyd and others. I was present for the initial event on the tour, which took place at CFB Trenton. And it was on a day when there was a repatriation of one of the fallen from that campaign. And we had our trailer set up on the premises, and that was the first site. It was not exactly a dry run, but it was the first place that we had launched this thing and brought it out to the public. And it was really moving. What it demonstrated was people all the way from the private rank right up to General Walt Matician, who was at the time the head of the Canadian Armed Forces, being extremely moved that this was not only a tribute to the fallen and to the armed forces in general, but that it was something that they really believed would be lasting, as a lasting memorial. And that said to everybody, the sacrifices of those people would not be forgotten, that it was now being properly memorialized. And so for the different aspects of it, they were gracious and humbled, and I think extremely, extremely grateful for this endeavor. And the general said as much to me personally and to others. The other thing that really struck us about it, both that day and afterwards, more so for me at least, more so than the visits by royalty and personalities and so on, was seeing the reaction of the families of the fallen services members, and how uniformly, how universally they were taken aback by the realism of the portraits, and how it was extremely moving, it was extremely emotional for them. But at the same time, you got a sense that, and some said as much, you got a sense that it was a real closure for them. In the same kind of thing, it was almost like they were getting to see their loved one, their son, daughter, husband, wife, one last time. But knowing that that memorial would be lasting almost seemed to be more important for them, because it was as if it exposed a fear that was common among them, that those sacrifices would be gone and forgotten in no time. And this provided a level of comfort and closure that I don't think any of us really anticipated until we saw it. And to me, that was the most profound element of the entire effort. It was tremendously important. For a number of reasons, and I won't even begin to list them all, but among them were the fact that I earlier alluded to Kin Canada having a long history of very significant projects, as well as a lot of tremendous local ones. And for an organization that hadn't undertaken something like this for a very long time, it was, I think, rewarding to rekindle that spirit beyond the local level, to see people cooperate from right across the country for that common cause. The nature of Kin Canada is such that it responds to community needs locally, whatever those might be and whatever the club decides are most worthy. So this opportunity to act as one was a really interesting and really rewarding sort of revisitation or resurrection of what the organization had once done in glory years and is fully capable of doing still today. It was wonderful to see how many people came to the fore in order to be able to pull this off. Understand, by no means was this a project that was pulled off by a small handful of individuals sitting in, an office or in isolation, and that was it. There's no chance this project would have happened as a tour. Dave would have executed his mural, but there's no chance this national tour would have happened had it not been for a great many people being tenacious, passionate, and very, very dedicated to making it happen. And that speaks a lot for the caliber of the people in the organization, but also for the worthiness of the cause. So when people like the chair of the steering committee, Roger Hebblethwaite, who helped to guide the project, or Leona Thorogood, who was on the Kin Canada Foundation board and helped be hands-on in putting together some of the charitable side of this, and most obviously Sean Libben with the promotion and the road logistics, and Bruce Lloyd and Ralph Bassett Associates, who had an uphill struggle, surprisingly, in trying to get corporate Canada to support this, because so many, surprisingly, were shy about getting involved because they didn't want to be seen to support war. So the very funding itself that we thought would be fairly easy to raise became a major, major challenge. And had it not been for all the clubs stepping up across the country, hosting events, doing their own fundraisers, this thing would not have happened. So if there was ever an example of, many, many hands make light work, this was absolutely it. So the accolades are deserved by many, and it was a wonderful demonstration of what can be accomplished when people pull together.